Welcome to the Moonbeaming podcast. I'm Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, an artist, author, and intuitive. And together we'll explore life through a creative and spiritual lens. You'll learn so much about mysticism, creativity, consciousness, depth psychology, business, and more. And you'll get to listen to conversations with luminaries that you won't hear anywhere else. With each episode, you'll receive insights, frameworks, inspiration, and tools to help you thrive and grow. Hello, welcome back to Moonbeaming, your source for life through a creative and intuitive lens. I'm so happy you are here. Thank you so much for being here. What a year. What a weird year. It was good. It was hard. It was all the things. I think this is the part of the year where we start to reflect. And if, similar to me, you felt some pockets of life happening to you, or the year happening to you, or events happening to you, you're not alone. And now is the time to begin to ground down into some agency, into some collaboration. And the way we can do that often is through reflection and is through opening our consciousness up to think about other possibilities. At the studio, we are shipping out Many Moons 2025. This is my gift to the world, my yearly gift to the world. And if you like this podcast, you'll love Many Moons. There's so much more practice. There are so many more prompts. There is so much more actionable information in Many Moons that you'll want to take with you all throughout the year and beyond. There are dozens of rituals and spells and tarot spreads that aren't to be used only in the day or week or month that you're receiving it, but forever. You know, there are tarot spreads for grief. There are tarot spreads for clarity. You can access that at any time. There are rituals for intuition and developing your intuition, for calling in support. You can use those rituals at any time you need them. So it really is, in its own way, this timeless product, this timeless project that I bring to you every year. And today's guest was one of the contributors. I am thrilled. This is the other part of Many Moons. It's this collaborative project where I invite other practitioners, creatives, writers, thinkers, just generally inspiring people to contribute a piece for a new moon or a full moon that includes some kind of activity, prompt, ritual, spell, tarot spread, recipe, something to bring you closer into yourself and also closer into collaboration with the living world around you. And my guest today has a ton of experience around doing just that. Today on the podcast, I have the one and only Jacqueline Suskin. Jacqueline Suskin is a poet, an educator who has composed over 40,000 improvisational poems with her ongoing writing project, Poem Store. Suskin is the author of 8 books, including The Edge of the Continent, Volumes 1 and 3, Help in the Dark Season, Every Day is a Poem, and A Year in Practice, with work featured in various publications, including the New York Times, the Atlantic, and the Los Angeles Times. An ecstatic earth worshiper, she lives in Detroit, where she works as a teaching artist with inside-out literary arts, bringing nature poetry into classrooms with her poem, Forest Curriculum. This was a beautiful conversation where we talked about the qualities of poetry, aka what the different components are of engaging with various muses. Jacqueline talked a lot about how she collaborates with nature and how nature can be both healer and teacher, especially for those of us who have perhaps been hurt or harmed by humans and may need some other forms of teachers and attunements. Jacqueline talked about how she knew how to start her project, Poem Store, and how she knew when to end it. So, if you're interested in beginnings and how to know if something is right for you, and if you're also curious about how to end something when something is complete, you're going to want to listen in, and so much more. This was just such a gorgeous, rich, poetic waka waka. I know I'm corny, everybody, but it really was. It was a poetic conversation, and I am thrilled that Jacqueline was a contributor to Many Moons, dream guest, dream collaborator. And when you read her piece for Many Moons or introduce yourself to her work, you will understand why. Here is my conversation with Jacqueline Suskin. I'm so excited to talk to you. I wanted to begin with poems, specifically 40,000 poems, over 40,000 poems. How does one create so much art?
Yeah. Yeah. And those are just the spontaneous poems. So those are the poems that kind of come off the top of the head in the improvisational project that I worked with for a long time called Poem Store. So those are just poems that I've written on the typewriter for people in person in sort of a performance piece kind of setting or in public spaces. But I've also written a lot of books of poetry too, and those come out completely differently. Those are not, well, they're not unpolished, and the spontaneous, muse that it strikes first, then secondly kind of gets tweaked, and the editing muse comes in with those. So I don't even know how many poems are in those books.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about improv poetry and maybe its link to channeling energy. Can you talk a little bit about what it feels like to write a poem? And I've read some of those poems, and you could have fooled me that they were like improv and not finished and, all of that. So can you just share a little bit about what it feels like to spontaneously improv channel a poem?
When I would do this, I'm writing for someone typically who's in front of me. I'm having an actual exchange with a person. So I am channeling something, and it's something that comes from that connection. So whatever they ask for, they get to choose what the poem is about. So it's interesting because on my own time, there is still this sense of communing with something else. And I think that's what most poets do. They commune with something macro that they then filter into the micro. And that is like the talent or the, skill of the poet. But then to include this other person, there's then this kind of connection and bond that happens within the writing. So I'm looking at those poems as this translation of what occurs between us. So they're offering something usually very vulnerable. The subject matter is, something that they're yearning for or looking for, something that they're grieving or celebrating. I'm witnessing them tell me about it in sometimes a single word and sometimes many words. And then I'm feeling whatever comes up in that. And honestly, my favorite part about the experience is that when I'm writing the poem, I don't have any thoughts. I'm not hearing the words come one after another. It's more of like a trance state. And every time at the end, I say, can I read it to you? Because I want to know what I wrote. And I have to tune into it in that way where I can hear myself say the words out loud to them. And then I can kind of know what stands between us. So I feel like the poems are like spells. They're like definitions almost for that particular person's question. They're like a prayer response. And that's making a unique part of the craft come forward, because not all poetry is like that. Not all poetry comes as this communication between, the poet and another person. So that feels like that's been a really special part of that project for me.
What is your experience of bringing poetry through when it is not on the spot improv channeling?
My most common experience, I'm just trying to think of this morning. This morning I woke up really early. I love to wake up before anyone else is up and kind of be with the sunrise. And that's like my most favorite time to write also. So when everything's really quiet, and I let the dog out, and the sun was doing something that I've never seen it do before here I'm in my new home. There's like this whole newness to every day here, but the sun was doing something very particular, and I instantly knew that I needed to write about it. So sometimes I think there's like a feeling that enters my body and I don't actually know what the words will be. So it can be very bodily. And then sometimes I will wake up in the night with a poem forming, and I have to just get out of bed and go get my paper and my pen and get right to it. And that is more of like, yes, there are words and I can hear them and they're being asked to come onto the page. But I think a lot of times there'll be these moments in life where there'll be something really profound that I feel, and I will immediately connect it with whatever I'm looking at or when I'm hearing or what my senses are picking up on. So there's something, like I said before, about this bridge between the macro and the micro, where I'm witnessing something small and earthly, and then I'm able to build this bridge between that and something like huge and divine or cosmic. And that almost feels like a task that has been placed upon me, and not as a burden, as like a joyous task, but that it's mine to carry through that bridge build. Like I have to build the bridge. I'm called to do it. And sometimes that's trickier than other times. Like I spend a long time meticulously crafting the bridge and going back to it and figuring out just the right word or just the right structure or cadence. But then other times the poem delivers itself almost fully formed. And I think that there are moments, I liked the way you said, is it sitting in the corner of the room? Because sometimes it is clear to me that something else is delivering the message. And then other moments are clearly like of my own body or my own experience. And sometimes it's a blend of those things. Like a conversation is happening, even if there isn't another person, between myself and the earth, or, the animals and the creatures that I come in contact with, or, things like that. There'll be these pieces of, I like to call it data. I constantly feel like I'm like a data collector, and that maybe my job on planet Earth is just to like collect and reflect these things that I witness, and that data collection is what I'm here to do. And I like that feeling. It kind of gives this groundedness to it. Like it's a task, but like I said, a joyous task.
When the poem writing is not so joyous, when you might feel blocked, or when it feels more challenging, or when you might feel frustrated, do you have any rituals that you do?
Yeah. I think I love to talk about this concept of writer's block, because I think it's like a really unique, I don't actually identify with certain parts of it, because I think that most of the time, if I don't have something to write about or I don't know what to say, it's not necessarily that I feel blocked. It's that I'm just being patient and waiting. And sometimes I need to rest. And so I'll be like, okay, I just take that as the genuine gesture of you need to rest now. And I'll follow the lead of that. But I do have a lot of rituals for helping me with discipline, because I do think that showing up to be able to write is a big piece of that. And there's a lot of discipline that has to happen to make the time and the space for all of that, not just to come through, but to get yourself in the habit of having the paper and the pen next to your bed, of letting yourself have a space where you can. I feel like the deepest piece of that for me is just accepting that this is my role in the world, and what could I do in my daily life to make that a more feasible thing that I can access. So simple things like that, like I have a little notebook everywhere, and I always allow myself to let whatever's coming through come through. But then I also love to just relax with it, because I don't think that the muse likes to be grasped at. And so sometimes that also looks like focus and enhancing my focus. So if I'm trying to focus on one project, because I have many ideas, there's plenty of things I'd like to write all day long, every day, I'll light a certain candle and say, okay, this candle is lit while I'm working only on this. And that signifies that for me. And sometimes it just helps to have little bits of focus like that. But I will say that, having a rhythm and ritual that I can rely on every day is a huge part of my practice of just being alive. And I think that that lends itself to what it is to be a poet, because that's kind of part of my every moment. So to have this ritualized, practiced life does enhance my ability to then do all these other things that allow me to believe in my craft, or give myself the time and the space for writing the things that come to me throughout the day.
I want to go backwards a little bit and stay there for a moment, where you said that you were a data collector. At another point, you said something, I'm paraphrasing, something along the lines of like, this is my role, like this is what I'm here to do in terms of being a writer. When did you know that? How can you be so sure? How do you think about purpose? How do you think about what you are contributing and why? I'd love to hear whatever comes forward for you around that.
Yeah, I love thinking about, there's a lot of gratitude in that for me. I feel really grateful to know that this is what I'm here to do. I don't take that lightly at all. I'm kind of amazed that that's possible, because I do notice from being connected and close to various people who are just constantly trying to sharpen what their purpose is and looking for it and longing for it. And I know there's a lot of pain around that, and a lot of just like deep desire. Whenever I talk about this, it's like, obviously it sounds really easy for me. And it's funny because it kind of is in a way. I've been like this ever since I was a child. So that's a big part of it. Is I was writing poems before I even knew what poems were. And I have all these little notebooks full of all this weird cryptic language before I really understood how to write well. I was drawn to write. And no one told me to do that. No one said, try to have a journal. That's what I liked to do. And so I think there's a piece of whatever comes through in our childhood state, and whatever, I had a particularly difficult childhood. So I think that holding those things from my childhood and kind of keeping that space for myself and the things that felt safe and sacred to me, even as a very, very young person, was sort of the way I protected myself. And that maybe that has allowed me to then accept that as something that I would never budge on. And I think that that's a big piece of why that feels so confident. I feel so confident around that as my purpose also. But then I've also felt the response from the world in a way that is unique. Like being a person who put myself in public doing this for so many years and witnessing person after person after person receive these words, that's very unique for a writer. You don't usually get to watch your reader respond to your work. And so I think there was something in that also boosted that sense of like confidence around my purpose.
I want to, there's so much there. We just did, the Moon Studio facilitated the Artist's Way. So it was like full of feelings and inner child healing. And have you ever done that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think that's so fascinating, that part about the intuitive childhood instinct towards, as well as the saving fragment or the protection stone or something that you like take with you as like, this was me, like in spite of everything, maybe because of everything, like this was me and this is what I felt drawn to create. So I love that. I love that. And I love the response from the world. And so I wanted to ask you, I think I had heard of you because I live in LA, and I don't think I ever like saw you or got a poem from you, but I think I like knew about you from friends of friends or something. And it was a big deal. Like people knew about, was it called
Poem Store? Yeah.
Yeah. And so you did it for a really long time. And can you just explain to the listeners who might not be familiar, one, the origin story of it inside of you, like what made you, want to do this, what it was, because I think we forgot that part when you were kind of talking about it. I just want to hear about it because it's very brave. Like it's made me as a writer, a lot of writers are fairly introverted, and a lot of writers need time with their work, right? Like you said, like there's this editing process, you put it in the drawer, you like read it out loud. Then it's like, you deliver it out to the public or to your readers. It was a very brave thing, I think, but it's also really fun and changes the way we can utilize creativity.
Yeah. One of the ways I like to talk about Poem Store is that it was a project that encapsulated some of my greatest skills. And one of those skills is writing, but the other skill that I think it really allowed me to lean into was the skill of connection and connecting really deeply. And there's like a performative aspect of that project that I think is really unique to being a writer. Like you said, a lot of writers are introverted, and I am in many ways. Like I get my energy from being alone. I'm an only child. Like that's where I restore and fill myself by being alone. And I love solitude and I love to be the hermit. But I also am a performer, and I've always been a performer. And as a kid, I would put on these little shows for my family, and there's something about expressing myself as myself, not pretending to be someone else, but just showing people who I am and inviting them into that and seeing what happens when you give that energy. And so Poem Store sort of allowed me to do all of that in one space. And the way that started was I have a degree in poetry. And so most people who get a degree in poetry end up going, to get their master's and probably their PhD, and they'll teach. And that's the most common route for a poet. But I had no interest in doing that because I wanted to like have things to write about. I wanted to have experiences. And so I let myself just kind of keep going in the world. And I met someone in Oakland who was doing this, who had a typewriter, and our friends introduced us just because, someone being a poet is usually, it's kind of rare. I don't meet a lot of people who identify as that or who are excited to, talk about poetry at length. So my friends were like, you need to meet this person. And he invited me to do this with him. And I had just bought a typewriter at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. And I had just bought this typewriter. So instantly I was like, that's so bizarre. And of course I'm going to follow through on this. And I showed up the next day with the typewriter, and he was like, I invite people to do this with me all the time, and no one ever says yes. I sat with him on this first day, and this woman came up to me and she was like, I would like a poem about heartbreak. But not the regular kind of heartbreak, but like when you look back on your life and there's all these things that you didn't get to do because you can't do everything, and it's heartbreaking, and you couldn't love everyone you wanted to love because you can't love everyone, and it's heartbreaking, and you couldn't go to all the places that you wanted to go because you can't go everywhere, and it's heartbreaking. And I was like, holy moly, like this is way more. Yeah, I was like, let's go. And I wrote the poem, and she cried and I cried. And I was just like, this is something, I could feel it in that first moment. Like this is a opportunity for me to engage in some sort of communion with humanity. And it's really showed me the human condition in this way that I will forever carry with me my whole life. It's allowed me to understand like what it is to be in service in this really unique, like one-on-one way. And so that led me to so many different things. You know, I have written 8 books, and because of that project, all of those books came to life. Like there's pathways that project opened up for me. And so it is funny to think of it as something like it was brave for me to sit myself in that public place. It was also the most psychically exhausting thing I've ever done. It was a really, really intense thing to do. But I think it was clear that it needed to happen in order for me to kind of, I didn't want to just conceptualize what was possible through poetry. And a lot of times as artists, that's what we have to do because you aren't usually in a position to, like I said, witness a person receiving what you're giving them. But to have that happen over and over again, I think it allowed me to be this person who can fully believe in the power of art in this way that is like not just conceptual.
I love that so much. How did you know it was time to end it?
I started to get, well, it was physically really hard on me. Like I had a lot of physical stuff come up, like learning how to let people's energy pass through me and learning how to protect myself. And, you know, I started doing this when I was really young. And I think I like fully drained my battery in a way that I will probably spend the rest of my life recovering from. And there's a lot of, I don't have grief in that because I don't think it could have happened any other way. I didn't have the information really, you know, I didn't know what was happening. So there's no other way. But I knew that it needed to stop because I could feel that exhaustion, and it was just clear to me that it would be like detrimental for my health if I didn't stop. And I also liked the idea of letting Poem Store be what it was and not pushing it and being, I always said, I don't want to be 40 years old at the farmer's market with a typewriter on my lap. It just doesn't feel right. That's not the vision I'm moving towards, is to like take this into my, you know, second half of life and just do that forever and ever and push it to its limit. I would like it to just be this sort of sacred container. And so it became clear that needed to stop. And I still write poems for people. I still do. I still get commissions all the time. I get past, you know, clients who are like, I want you to write, you know, for my anniversary, or I'm going through a really hard time and I would love to have a poem, you know, that people still reach out to me for poems. And I love getting to write them from the safety of my own home. And I can imagine a future situation where I could nurture that project to come back to life for a minute and give that to people, because it is really, it's one of the most beautiful things I think I can offer. But it's also like, I have to protect myself. I've learned so much about that from this experience.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other podcast episode. I teach whole classes on that topic, energetic hygiene and protection magic. I'm really curious about what qualities you think you need, or you think a living poet needs in order to write poetry, because there's something about poems. Poems are one of the most, for me personally, they impact me a lot, but they also feel very far away from me in terms of creating one. Like, they're very deceptive, but there's just so few words, but it's doing so much. I'm a fan of shorter poems. I'm not a huge fan of the like chapter long. That's just me personally. I like a nice contained poem. And then I'm just like, whoa. But when I sit down to write it, I'm like, wow, this is really hard. This is like really challenging because you're pulling in so much. there's so much there. And so I was wondering, it seems like you have just a natural affinity towards it, but when you kind of like sit down to think about what some of the qualities of a good poem are, or qualities of a live poet are, what do you think they are?
Yeah, I think that there is something about the way a poem synthesizes so many things and condenses it into this tight, very cared for expression. And I think that, so first and foremost, there has to be this deep love of language and a curiosity around language and a desire to kind of pick apart words. And the magic of language is so complex and old and is always shifting and always changing. And it's this ever expanding, growing thing. So there has to be this, I think, deep interest in that. You have to be so curious about words. And on top of that, there has to be this great quality of observation. Like you have to be an observer to an extent that maybe other people, I like to think of it as that not everyone has time to do that, or not everyone prioritizes that. I think it's very human to do any of these things. I actually think poetry lives in people. It's a people's kind of tool. I think of it as a tool. And I think that some people are more inclined to create the tool and sharpen the tool and craft the tool. And then some people are like, let me just receive the tool. I'll use it to better understand myself. And the poet is writing and doing that also. So there has to be this level of observation that goes like beyond the minuscule and the tiny and back to the macro and the cosmic, and that you have to be kind of willing to be pulled in all these directions. And I'll feel a poem building in me for days and days. I'll feel something like coming to me. And so I also think that there's a big patience in it. There's like a huge level of patience. And then sometimes the muse will hit in this way where it's just like the impact is so intense and you have to give yourself that time and space to write it. But I could imagine that being too much for some people. Like too much pressure, too much impact, too much force, and that maybe that's not right for everyone to be the translator of so much. And I've written poems about the task of translation and how it is a large task and not everyone is suited to sift through so much information like that. And I think I said it before where to me it's joyous, but I could imagine it's also it's a lot. I could imagine it being way too much for someone who isn't inclined to kind of sit there with it. And then I think the final piece of that, I mean, I could talk about poetry and what it is to be a poet for hours because I think it's really particular, but like I said, I also think it's very human. So there's so many things that kind of come in and out of it. But I do think that there is this quality of also being able to dissect what you have created and to have this desire to make it more accessible and maybe more interesting and more polished. And that I talk about it like there's these different muses. There's this muse who delivers the inspiration. And some people only want that muse. Some people just want the inspiration delivered. They want to write that in their journal. They want to just let it flow through. And that's great. Just that you are a poet also if you do that. But then there's this next step with this editing muse, this other muse who comes, who's like, hey, we're going to sharpen this and make this so incredibly either accessible or deeper, or we're going to pay tribute to that first muse. And that is a task, and you have to commune with this other muse to make that task happen. And I think that really is what makes a poet go from good to great, is this ability to kind of say, okay, yes, I wrote this initial thing. I love it. I see it. But will other people see it? Is it actually, have I gone to the limit that I can go to with it? Have I pushed myself to really craft it and change it. And that's also the difference between something spontaneous and then something that you sit with for a long time and you take care of and you really tweak. And I think when you're talking about, looking at a poem that's offered up to you in a book or somewhere that someone's taken so much time to find the exact right words for, and it is almost like it can be painstaking, but it's an enjoyable effort.
How do you know when a poem is done?
I actually think I feel it in my body. That's probably what my answer is. I will read a poem out loud over and over again. I'll consider every word, and then suddenly I'll just receive this bodily feeling that's like a release or something. Like I can feel kind of like or a spark, something that just feels like, oh, I have a clear feeling that I don't need to go any further with this. But then I also love to get other people involved. Like in all of my books, I've worked with the same editor, and he and I have this very special relationship. We've known each other since we were in college. I think he knows what my vision is. And so he can see things that I can't, that maybe I would miss. And I think that's another piece of it, is like you're willing to allow this to be a process instead of just, I'm a genius. The thing I wrote is perfect and I love it, and I think that that's a great feeling too. And you can just love that feeling. But then there's this other level that you get to when that's why they call it a craft, because you can sit there and work on your craft and tune it and, fine tune it and chisel it and focus, and that it becomes this deeper offering when you do allow it to be that.
I love it. I love it. We're going to move on to another phrase that jumped out at me from your bio, which is earth worshiper. Earth worshiper. So you recently put out a book. I don't want to put words in your mouth, the poet, but it is about reverence for seasons, cycles, nature, earth. I had you talk about ritual and earth for the 2025 Many Moons. You contributed an incredible piece that hopefully we'll have time to get into. I really want to hear about what is the importance for you worshiping the earth, and what are some of the ways that you do that?
I can't remember when this phrase ecstatic earth worshiper came into my life, but I was like, that is me. I am ecstatic about the earth, and the earth is just what always delivers me my inspiration and my sense of belonging. And I mean, I'm an earthling, I'm a planetary being. I belong to this place. And so I think that even going back to my childhood, that was where I felt familial and familiar. I would just go outside and have my little secret time with the earth, and I felt at home. And I think that there's like a common sense in that to me, like a real base level feeling. So it's interesting to build off of something like that and then let that be like very sacred and divine, because it's not necessarily this thing that requires very much of me to tap into, because it does feel so sort of, I'm looking out the window right now and I can see a tree, I can see the sky, I can instantly find it. And I think there's something about that has always just been clear to me. Like, yeah, you're here, and just remember you're here. And how does it feel to be here? And so worshiping I love the word reverence so much, because I think there is this idea of gratitude in it. And that's a big piece of what my work kind of reflects, I think, is not just the way it feels to be in communion with the earth, because like I said, sometimes that can actually feel very simple for me, and just to breathe and be, and that's it. I don't have to overthink that. I can just let myself appreciate that. But then what does it look like to pay tribute in response to it? How do I take care of it? How do I engage with it? And anything that offers me that much solace and peace then makes me in return want to reciprocate. Like I feel a relationship with the earth. And so I think through my writing and through my own rituals, I notice that the quality of that reciprocity gets heightened, and I can feel like any relationship, if I give to it and interact with it, then it goes beyond that sort of base level sense of connection. It goes into the depth of relationship, and I can actually feel like there's something that we're exchanging with the planet. And I see people do this in so many different ways. And in my life, I was like, okay, I, as a poet, feel this responsibility to try to translate that. And I don't want to just do that for myself. I want other people to remember that they are also the earth and that the earth exists around them. And so a lot of it feels like just reminders to me. And I think that that's a lot of what ritual ends up being, is this like consistent practice of remembering. And remembering for me looks like remembering that I have a relationship with the earth, that it's not just something that I take from, it's something that I give to. And it's not something that's just happening without me. It's something that's constantly happening with me. And I think that's where the seasons came in, is that I started to notice over the years how much the seasons were impacting my well-being, my sense of self, my creative practice. And I thought, okay, we need to remember this. This is just something the earth is kind of pointing out to me. Like, hey, this is affecting you. You're deeply affected by these rhythmic qualities that the planet produces constantly. And although those qualities are shifting, like you are shifting too. So you still need to remember them. And so writing this book really helped me kind of get a little bit of a focus on, okay, well, how does that look like then to help other people remember that? And more, not just in poetry, but also in prose, in practice, in sort of like this, what is this guidance that I receive and how can I make it as accessible as possible so that other people can kind of connect to their own way of doing that?
Yeah, I think this like fundamental piece of being a human that I'm constantly trying to remember myself and remind other people is that we are nature and like we are a part of nature. We've sort of strayed. We're a very weird species. We're like some weird mutant kind of. I don't know. Are we part alien? It's really hard to say. I really trip out on that a lot. But when we remember we're nature and that we're in a relationship with the earth and with nature and with cycles and with seasons and with light and temperature, and we're animals, and we ourselves, and this is like a very unique process, and I'd love to hear a bit about yours, but when we remember that sometimes the seasons and the cycles are a mirror and we work really well within them, like for example, summer and blooming and like coming out with things or being out more in the world. Some people hate summer. Like some people are like, nope, I'm inside. I'm in a dark room. I get the summer sads. I don't. I love summer. That's why I moved to LA. But, so I think understanding what happens to us physiologically and mentally and emotionally as a result of our connection to the seasons, and then also grouping that in with whatever season we're in our life, because we might be in I call it like a new moon season where we're like, everything's fresh and we're like, just started a new job and like, we are like going a different way to work and we're all just like, wow, this is all new. I'm learning or, whatever. Or we might be in a waning moon phase or a dark moon phase where we're like dealing with grief and someone we love has gone and we need to sift through their things and we need space to cry. And that's like going to have a very different effect on you if it's summer. Like if you've lost someone and it's summer, you might not want to go out into the sun, or that might be the remedy. I don't know, that it might hold you in a different way. So you brought in your book, you brought in creativity. and the seasons and creating with the seasons inside of the seasons. And so I was wondering, and readers can pick that book up. I highly recommend it, especially if you are interested in everything that we've been talking about so far, folks. It's an amazing resource. So I was wondering if you could just share maybe a little bit about your own process, or maybe just some advice for folks to get started, or things to think about if they're like, oh, I've never thought about that, or, oh, that feels really intuitive and really organic to me. How can I start thinking about this? I'd love to hear from you.
There's something in what you just said that feels sort of like at the root of what the book is. And the book is called A Year in Practice. And the idea is, I've talked about this concept of practice in this way where I'm not just talking about folks who are making artwork or practicing something specific. I'm talking about the practice of being alive and the practice of figuring out how to feel the way that you would like to feel, or moving towards something that feels like expansive for you, or whatever that looks like. But there's practice involved in that, and it takes effort and work. And I think just listening to what you just said, there's this root in that is knowing yourself and knowing how you are affected and knowing what is affecting you and knowing where your feelings are coming from. And this is a complex, you are made up of all of these things from your past and the present moment. And then the earth is affecting you and other people are affecting you. What you take in a day is affecting you. There's so much going on just in yourself. But I think at the root of understanding yourself, then that's when all of these other things in your life start to bloom. Like you can practice knowing who you are in response to all these different things. And so this is just one outlet for that. And that was why I was excited to make this book, because I think it's an actual, it's a system. It's something you can use to know yourself better. And even going back to talking about what it is to be a poet, I think that I'm tuning into my own response and feelings as a human being. And there's something beautiful and universal in that. And that's an important piece. But then there's also actually just me and knowing what makes up this weird cosmic tangle and why do I respond this way? And what about this would I like to work on? What about this would I like to nurture? And my experience tuning into the seasons is really just built around that question. Like, okay, I'm going to give myself the opportunity to tune into this earthly rhythm and see, how does this affect me? And so the whole book is sort of like offering up my own experience, but with these pathways and outlets for the reader to then question that for themselves. Like you were saying, like some people love summer, some people don't. It's not a prescriptive book. And I think that that's a big piece of the earth isn't prescribing us with this exact way of being, but it is saying, here are all of these ways that you can be nurtured or you could be held. And here are all of these offerings. I think of Earth as this incredible, perfect system that offered us, all of our needs were met by the Earth. We've always had everything we've needed at a very basic level, but also at like a heightened, spiritual level. And so in this position that we're in now, where there's so much we've been disconnected from because of all these other human systems that have come from places of greed and oppression, it's an opportunity to respond to what we actually need on a base level. And I think going back to that's why the seasons feel so critical in this moment. I had someone ask me about this book, well, the seasons are really changing. And so how does that respond to what you've just created? And what do you have to say about that? And I was like, well, I think now more than ever, we should memorize what these seasons are trying to show us, because the grasp on that concept might be shifting, quicker than we can really imagine. And I think that doesn't take away from the power of the wisdom that is there. And I think that maybe if we could tap into that now, it might help us moving forward to see even what we're losing to even comprehend what is being lost and how that could be an incredible and helpful clarity to have.
There's a couple things you said I wanted to just go into a little bit because I really loved it. For you right here, right now, how would you talk more? How would you describe or define life as practice? Because that's a different way to look at living, I think.
One of the first things that comes to mind when I say that, like stepping into this feeling of life as practice, is doing whatever I can do in a day to kind of heighten my own curiosity and to follow that curiosity. So I think if I were to give like in a sentence of guidance or something, looking around the world and noticing the things that you think are beautiful, the things that excite you, the things that you are actually drawn to, whether that be just even in a deep gaze where you're like, wow, I really just noticed myself spending a long time looking at this sunrise and it's doing something for me. And what information is there for me in that? And because I think that we're so rushed. We're so busy. We're worked so hard. And yet there's a constant offering of this information. And the practice in that is letting yourself have the time and the space to receive the information. And I would just love to say that that's it. Just like receiving that information. And then obviously that would be different for each person, but that act of being curious and allowing that information to enter your mind and your body and your spirit will give something else to you. And then you can practice honing that and being true to that and nurturing that. So like in that solid example of staring at the sunrise and asking myself this morning, like, why is this moving me so much? Why? And I was like, well, the truth is what I'm seeing is different than what I normally see. And my eyes are receiving a different kind of light. And there is an actual bodily response to that. I can feel myself waking up in a different way. There's energy there that's being offered to me. And as this tired person who's trying to practice, coming to life every day and being engaged, and that is sort of the base of practice, right? Like I'm trying to practice living. And I don't like to say even my best life. I'm just trying to practice living life and being alive and feeling alive, whatever that looks like for me. And so to notice these things that are giving to me, and the earth is always doing that constantly on every level.
And the other thing I will say to follow your point that I just really want to underscore is that not all of us, but certainly some of us, either in this digital space right now or listening, we weren't really taught how to live. Like we weren't taught life as practice. We weren't taught how to figure out how to wake up every morning and go to bed each night and in between notice what we're paying attention to, and then maybe being brave enough or summoning the energy and effort to follow that noticing into wherever it might lead us to then make us become alive in different ways or experience things in different ways. And I love that. No, this is not about like some best life or some like optimized whatever. It's about being alive and it's about living. And I think that utilizing nature, collaborating with nature, following nature, listening to nature as just this support system and mirror to ourselves is the most easiest and most true way to begin. And it's so simple and it's so easy. And I was rereading your piece for many moons, like ahead of speaking with you, and you wrote about spring, and case in point of what we were talking about earlier, you have some, at least in this piece, there's some like caution, like Spring is like, you're like, I don't know about you, spring. And you're like, I remind myself to move into my practice with caution, like a tender animal who hasn't seen the sun in months. If I'm too quick, I'll end up like the plum tree that put out its blossoms too soon. When a windstorm came out of nowhere, the little flowers got thrashed and the tree's crop wasn't as plentiful. I heed this warning and make sure not to push myself into the mindset of productive outcomes too soon.
I just really appreciate the piece of this that is the idea of learning, and that maybe we weren't taught. And there are so many teachers. And the fact that, yeah, when you're young, maybe the people who you're exposed to, your family, your teachers, maybe they're not offering you the tools that you really need. And there's many reasons why that they didn't. And I do think that being in a position of teaching or offering up wisdom often feels way more appropriate to me through the lens of the earth, because it is this entry point. And I say that a lot. I do a lot of eco poetry and nature work in classrooms with young students. And I love letting nature be the thing that guides them into talking about their identity, because it's so much more of a gentle entrance. It's not just human. It's way more vast, and it feels like there's a lot of space there to be yourself and to explore who you are through the lens of the natural world, because it's not so strictly connected to being human. And I think that, obviously you are nature, yes, but there is this spaciousness there that allows people to express themselves and explore these huge feelings without that construct of only the human world being only human language, only human experience. That feels like, especially for things like grief and pain and struggle and transformation, like learning all of the things to move from a place of pain or a place of true suffering, it's actually made easier with the help of this kind of, like, I always think of that the earth is just holding them while they do it. So they're being held by the earth and the metaphors that come with the earth. And that's just a way more it's just so much more gentle. And so I think that feels like, I loved what you're saying, is that, yes, someone might not have taught you what you can receive from something as simple as looking at the sunrise, and that the information that's there for you might actually not be simple. It might be really painful, but that the earth allows this entry point to that isn't so exacting. It can be, that's why I think creating poetry around these things is like it's almost like a hand that holds you as you move through it. And the hand can actually be the sky, or the hand could be, the rabbit, or the hand could be the tree. And I think that it's sometimes easier for someone who has maybe suffered, especially like trauma through other human beings, to not have to learn directly from other human beings. And that's been the case for me, for sure. And I think even being someone who is in a position in my career to offer guidance and information, that doing so with the earth as my partner makes way more sense to me than saying I as this human who was not taught am now teaching, but I'm not teaching alone. It's not just me, Jacqueline Suskin, telling you what I think and what I know. It's, me and my spouse, the earth, me and my collaborator, this planet, who is also your collaborator. So we share this. And that feels so beautiful and inviting.
This just feels like a very held place to end. Jacqueline, as you've said, you have many books that people can check out. I highly recommend all of them. Are there any other places you exist in the world where folks can, is there a newsletter? Is there some kind of social media? Do you ever teach publicly? Like, I just love to, I know folks are going to want to be following along with you, both in print and maybe digitally. So if you could just share some ways folks could stay abreast of all of your beauty.
Yes.
And
Thank
offering.
you. Yeah, I do have a Substack, and I have paid subscription and a free newsletter that comes out every month. Both of those come out every month. That's a good way to find out if I do workshops, because I do offer a lot of different writing workshops. And one of the things that I've been enjoying the most in the last few years is I do a lot of one-on-one like editing work or project development work with people who are creating books usually. So editing other people's writing is like such a beautiful exchange. It's like Poem Store, but next level, because it's their words, not mine. So that feels really special. And then I do try to stay active on Instagram when I can, when it feels right.
Beautiful. And we'll put those links in the show notes for folks too. Thank you so much. This was just very wonderful. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, there it all was, wasn't it? Life as practice. That is one that I'll be holding into my heart and I will be engaging with. That was really a big compass and a beautiful reminder for me in our conversation. And this could be a good time for you to reflect on your takeaways and what you'd like to implement into your days. There was so much there. I know that I'll be reflecting on this one for a while. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. You can find Jacqueline's Substack and her social media in the link in the bio. And I really encourage you to pick up at least one of her books. You could start with A Year in Practice, and then you could pick up Many Moons, and then you might want to pick up a book of her poetry as well. Thank you so much for being here. I'm wishing you so much love, so much space, so much grace, so much curiosity, and I'll be back next week. Bye for now. Moonbeaming is a Moon Studio production. It is edited by the wonderful Amelia Ruby at Softer Sounds, and theme music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic. Hire them both for all your audio and podcast needs. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're always looking for aligned sponsors. So if you are a business or creative who'd like to sponsor an episode or two, reach out. If you love this podcast, please consider joining our membership to support it, sharing on social media, passing it along to friends, or leaving us a 5-star review. We'd appreciate it so much, and we appreciate you. Thanks for being here.